One of the greatest obstacles to crafting health and wellness is identifying and controlling inflammation. It's at the core of all complex and chronic diseases, and it's the driving mechanism that underlies the most common symptoms that people like you struggle to overcome. Join us as we explore cutting-edge science and research to give you the information and tools you need to create the quality of life you want and deserve. And now, here is the host of Inflammation Nation, Dr. Stephen Noseworthy.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. If you've been listening and you're up to date with my most current episodes, you'll have learned about the functional hierarchy of health. That was one of my longer mini-series, but it takes you through the most common physiological problems that cause the most common health complaints. And it's a great place for you to start when you're trying to solve your own health problems. But I have to ask a question. And that question is, what's the point? What's the point of not being tired? Or what's the point of not having brain fog? What's the point of not being able to sleep well? Hey guys, welcome back. If you've been listening to the podcast and you're up to date with the most current episodes, you will have recently learned about the functional hierarchy of health. And that was one of my longer mini-series, but it takes you through the most common physiological problems that cause the most common health problems. And it's a great place for you to start when you're trying to solve your own health problems. But I have to ask a question, what's the point? What's the point of not being tired or not having brain fog? What is the point of being able to sleep well or to be able to handle stress properly? What does it mean to you to have hormone balance and control, or to know that you're doing everything you can to protect your heart and to protect your brain? And I think the easiest answer is simply this: life is better when you're not tired, right? Life is better when you're not foggy, when you're not grouchy, when you're not moody, when you're not anxious or depressed. And life is better when you can focus and be creative and be productive. Life is better when you're not getting sick over and over again and your gut doesn't rule your social life. Life is simply better when you feel like you're the person you are meant to be and you can show up in the lives of the people that you love. In other words, in a very real sense, it's about quality of life, being able to do the things that make life worthwhile and that give it value. That's the easy answer. But it's the short-term answer. You see, every single person that I've ever worked with in my almost 30 years now in my career in natural medicine, every single person had something going on that was making life somewhat miserable for them in their current time or in the present. Every day was a struggle to one degree or another, and they finally got to the point where the thought of this being their life became untenable, and they started to look for answers and look for solutions to their current problems. But very few of them turned their thoughts to the long term once their immediate symptoms were controlled or were resolved. And this phenomena of a lower quality of life coming from a health problem is what we call morbidity. Now, today we're going to be talking about longevity. But let me kind of get through this introduction first before we get to the meat and the guts of things. So just to be clear, most people go to the doctor because of complaints related to this thing called morbidity. Back in 2013, the journal Mayo Clinical Proceedings published a paper that looked at the top 10 reasons people go to see their medical doctors. And one of the things that they discovered was that the top reasons, varied based on age. For example, among teenagers and young adults, the most common reason that people went to see the doctor was skin conditions, dermatology, which makes sense, right? Because when you're young, that's the time when we are perhaps most concerned about our appearance and how others see us. But among the elderly, the most common reason to see the doctor was risk for heart disease and things like hypertension. But if we look across all ages, the most common reasons people see their medical doctor is as follows, and I'm going to start with the most common first, and there's about 8 of them. So number 1 is skin conditions, and this is across all ages. Skin conditions followed by arthritis and back pain, followed by disorders of lipid metabolism, and you can translate that into cardiovascular risk. then upper respiratory tract infections and disorders, then anxiety and depression, followed by chronic neurological disorders, followed by headaches and migraines, followed by the management of diabetes. And these are the most common reasons why people go to see their doctors. And all of these things contribute to morbidity, which we could loosely translate, accurately so, into the loss of quality of life. Now, I just want to read a couple of sentences from the introduction of this paper from the Mayo Clinic. Chronic diseases account for the majority of healthcare utilization and expenditures in middle-aged and older populations. 1/4 of Americans with chronic conditions account for almost 2/3 of total healthcare expenditures. And as the population ages, more individuals are living with multiple chronic medical conditions. Right? It's no secret that we live longer than our ancestors did. And at this point, worldwide life expectancy is now 73 years old. And that's 6 years longer than it was just 20 years ago. And scientists attribute this to having better access to better medical care and better hygiene, more access to food and basic nutrition, as well as reductions in the mortality in vulnerable populations like infants and children, particularly in less well-developed countries. But as researchers from Cambridge pointed out in 2015, this increasing longevity has not been matched by an equivalent decrease in morbidity. In other words, people are living longer, but they're living sicker longer, right? So life expectancy is increased, but at the expense of increased morbidity. We're better at extending life than we are at increasing the quality of life. And under those conditions, living longer simply means a longer life with the disability that comes from morbidity or symptoms and suffering, right? Longer lives with the symptoms and the limitations of things like diabetes and heart disease, arthritis, dementia, inflammation, pain, and so on. There's a British-American anthropologist, he's passed on now, his name was Ashley Montagu. He's often quoted as saying that the idea is to die young, as old as possible. And I'm not sure if Abraham Lincoln said this first, but he's often quoted also as saying, it's not the years in your life that counts, but the life in your years. And this quote exists in different versions. The one that speaks to me is it's better to add life to your years than just years to your life. You know, a few years ago, and I think I mentioned this on the podcast before, but a few years ago, I lost my mom at the age of 84. And I was grateful that she was pretty functional and productive up until the end. She really didn't suffer all that much, and then she was gone. And it was a blessing in that sense, right? Now, my dad is the same age that she was when she died. And he's had some health challenges recently, but he's handled them quite well. And at 85, he's mentally sharp, he's physically active, he's productive, he's got a good family and a good social life. In fact, he's the last of all of his brothers and sisters and even all of his close friends that he's had over the years. All of these people are gone with the exception of one close friend whom he has watched slip into dementia and physical disability over the last 2 years. And that friend is now in a long-term care facility and doesn't know his own daughter. So my dad and I had this conversation not long ago about going out with a bang rather than diminishing slowly over many years. And don't misinterpret me when I say going out with a bang. I'm not talking about using a gun to kill himself, but basically the point is this, like, who wants to dwindle and fade to the point where your life isn't what you hoped it would be, and every day you're just waiting for the end to come rather than being out there living your life to the fullest? And this has been on my mind a lot lately, and I've been having conversations, and I've been having this conversation for years with my one-on-one coaching clients about what comes next, like what comes after we handle the immediate complaints that brought someone to see me, to work with me one-on-one. Right. In other words, I'm now actively trying to shift my client's mindset from solving the problem of morbidity, right, symptoms and suffering from disease or dysfunction, to the intentional crafting of healthy longevity. And I'm not saying ignore your immediate symptoms. I'm saying, like, once those things are under control and you feel better, what's next? Do you just live that way, or do you set a plan, create a vision, and then start working towards that. I explained to them that I understand that they want to not be fatigued, right? Not foggy, not forgetful, and all of these things translate into a better quality of life. And they want that now. But what if that's all we do? And what if I help them do a good job of feeling and functioning better, only to have them suffer from a heart attack or have a disabling stroke, in 10, 15 years, or maybe live to be 100, having someone else feed them and wipe their butt because they can't take care of themselves? Like, have I really helped someone if their fate is aging unwell? And my answer is no, right? And I'm not trying to imply that I have some kind of crystal ball and I know everyone's fate, or that I can guarantee something bad won't happen in the future. Nobody can do that. All we can do is everything we can to stack the odds in someone's favor, to reduce the likelihood of some kind of an adverse event and give them a chance at aging gracefully and well. So what does that mean to you, right? It means that you have to have two mindsets. You have to have 2 points of focus, and that is now and later. It is morbidity and it is mortality. And the good news is that the underlying mechanisms that cause most of your current and common health complaints also play a central role in causing the poor quality of life of aging unwell. And so if you follow some of the advice that I've been giving over the last year and a half in this podcast, you're probably well on your way to protecting your future health. But I would encourage you in a few more ways. And over the next few episodes, we'll be talking about longevity and what you and I can take away from cutting edge of aging science. Now, let me stop here a minute, because you might be thinking I'm confusing some concepts. On one hand, I said that focusing on improving your health right now reduces your morbidity, but doesn't necessarily improve your longevity. But then I said that fixing or controlling the root causes of your current morbidity symptoms helps you to age well, right? So doesn't it stand to reason that finding and fixing your current symptoms at the level of root cause automatically increases your chance of aging well? And the answer is yes and no. And in order to understand that, let's start with some basic facts, maybe a definition or two. I've already defined morbidity as the symptoms and suffering that comes from some disease or dysfunction. And closely related to morbidity is the concept of disability, which varies in intensity on how your symptoms have affected your functional capacity and your quality of life. Right now, granted, the word disability is typically used to refer to like being disabled in the common sense of the word, but in a very real sense, any reduction in your functional capacity is a disability, or perhaps I should say disability, if you catch the nuance and the difference. It's like saying disease and dis-ease. Now, it should be obvious that improving your health reduces your morbidity symptoms that are causing some degree of disability or a loss of functional capacity. To say it another way, improving your health improves your functional capacity and your quality of life, but that may or may not improve your life expectancy. So life expectancy is how long you're expected to live from this point in time forward, with the concept of mortality relating to death from any cause. And obviously those two things are interrelated. And so what you're shooting for then is to resolve your current health problems in such a way that you not only improve your quality of life in the present time, which is adding life to your years, but we extend and increase our disease-free years, where quality of life and functional capacity improves and extends over a long period of time. And what that means is that we have to be able to distinguish between lifespan and something called health span. Now, lifespan or longevity, and really those two things are the same, is how long you live regardless of whether you're healthy or not. That's what lifespan is, or longevity is. It's just simply how long you live. Whereas health span is the idea of aging well. It's that portion of your total lifespan where you're living free from the morbidity and the reduced functional capacity of dysfunction and disease. And this word health span, it's a relatively new concept, and the word itself actually first showed up in medical research somewhere around the 1990s. and it was added to the Webster Dictionary as a new word only in 2018. So, 5 years ago from when I'm recording this. Now, technically, lifespan, which is the total years you live, whether you're healthy or not, includes your health span, right? Because lifespan is the number of years that you are well plus the number of years that you're not. And being well, just to define that, is the state of being free from disease and dysfunction. And as a result of that, or therefore wellness, is the opposite of morbidity. And it's the opposite of disability. And all of these concepts exist under the umbrella of aging, which is not just the accumulation of time, but it's also the time-related process of deteriorating physiology. Let me say that one more time. All of these concepts, mortality, morbidity, your disability or loss of functional capacity, your health span, your lifespan, all of these things exist under the umbrella concept of aging, which again is not just simply the accumulation of time, but it's a time-related process of deterioration in your physiology and your body chemistry. And there's another word here that is part of longevity and science, and it is called senescence. Senescence. It comes from the Latin word senex, which simply means old, and this root word senex also gives us other age-related words like senile. But this word senescence is often taken and used synonymously with the word aging. And that's true, but it's kind of only partly true, because senescence doesn't only occur when you get old. The biological process of senescence happens even all the way back during embryonic development, and it continues throughout your entire life. And so we have to make a distinction between this thing called senescence as a biological process versus senescence as a state of a condition of a cell, which implies aging. And I think I'll clarify that as I continue on here. So first of all, as a normal biological process, senescence, which again, we typically use synonymously with aging, senescence as a biological process is a cell arrest program that prevents cells with damaged DNA from replicating and perpetuating a faulty genome to future generations of cells. Right? You probably remember a little bit about, say, high school biology, where we probably learned about cell division called mitosis, and there's different stages. But basically, as we go through life, our cells divide roughly 50 times before the cell arrest program kicks in to protect us. In other words, cells cannot divide infinitely. You take an original cell and it divides into two, and those divide into two more. Now we have four, and so on. That can only happen roughly 50 times before the original cell has to go, right? And this is a biological limit on cell division, and it's called the Hayflick limit, after the biologists and research who discovered this phenomenon. And the theory is that as cells respond to growth signals, and they divide over and over and over again, up until a limit of about 50 replications, the theory is that they incur damage that affects their DNA. And at some point, in order to protect the health of the entire system, the cells stop responding to these growth signals. And what's more, they actually take on characteristics, biochemical characteristics, that makes them targets for elimination, essentially creating chemicals that essentially invite the immune system to come in and clean them out. And that is a good thing, right? So senescence is a pre-programmed cellular function that allows routine and predictable replacement of damaged and defective cells. And it's part of how we maintain and protect function and how we stave off the impacts of aging. It's constant cell renewal, in other words. And so the time frame between the production of a new cell to when that new cell becomes old and is replaced through senescence, it varies by cell type, right? Not all cells and cell types age in this way at the same rate. It may take longer for these 50 cycles of replication in some tissues, and it might be shorter in others. For example, it takes roughly 10 years for all the cells and entire bone to be replaced, while the epithelial cells or the cells in healthy skin is replaced roughly every 2 weeks. And so this Hayflick limit is reached very quickly in skin cells, but it takes a long time for these 50 cycles of replication to happen in a bone cell. And this is happening all the time, or at least it should be. So again, on one hand, senescence is a normal biological process that protects us. It helps us to renew and regenerate cells. Now, on the other hand, as we get older and we are progressively exposed to things like inflammation and oxidative stress, we accumulate damage to cells and to cell communication systems to the point that senescence at the cellular level becomes less efficient. Cells live longer than they should and with less functional capacity, and they pass on faulty, damaged DNA to the next generation of cells, which gets perpetuated. And this is one reason for age-related decline of different tissues, different organs, and indeed the entire system. And so senescence then can refer not just to this normal biological process, but also it can refer to the state of a cell or a tissue or an organ that has lived too long with faulty function. But when tissues and organs fail to replace these aged senescent cells, and the more these senescent cells that make up tissues and organs accumulate, the more the function of those cells, tissues, and organs is negatively affected. And since you as an entire human being are made up of a collection of interconnected biological systems, which themselves are made up of organs that contain tissues, which are made up of cells, senescence ultimately affects your entire body to one degree or another. Now, just to be clear, senescence can be seen as a necessary and desirable part of cell function, starting in utero, and it protects us as we age. But over time, we lose control of this protective mechanism, and tissues and organs accumulate cells that should already have been replaced, but were not. And so senescence can be considered the aging and the decline of the entire system because of the accumulation of aging cells within our tissues and organs that have not responded properly to what we call death signals, again, being replaced. Now, there's no doubt that age brings decline, right? We just have to be observant, right? And then the most obvious outer manifestation of that is the condition and the appearance of someone's skin. Right? We all know someone whose skin looks very young for their age, and we also know someone whose skin looks very old for their age. And we see that a lot with people who are alcoholics, for example, people who are smokers, people who are, like down in the South, we call them the sun worshipers. But you need to know that as your skin ages, so too do your internal organs. Yet internal aging is heterogeneous. It's not the same everywhere, right? Not all organs and systems age at the same rate. Just because someone has youthful skin for their age doesn't mean that they don't have accelerated aging in, for example, their liver or their brain or their bones. Those things can be either too old or too young for their chronological age as well. And on the flip side, if you are older, regardless of the appearance of your skin, please don't trick yourself into thinking that while your skin ages on the outside, and everyone can see that, don't trick yourself into thinking that your insides are the same state and functionality as they were when you were 18 years old. And I see this a lot with some of the older clients that I've worked with who've had health problems for many years, and they're surprised when I explain to them that some of their chronic problems might be related to this age-related decline. Just as their skin ages, so too does, for example, their gut. And maybe part of the chronicity of their gastrointestinal symptoms are due to age-related loss and decline. And, it could be the gut, it could be hormones, it could be brain, it could be their sleep system. And the unfortunate thing is that in some cases where internal systems have aged inappropriately, or simply aged because the person I'm working with might be in their, mid, late 80s, early 90s, sometimes that age-related decline and loss of function, there's not much that we can do to bring that back. And of course, nobody wants to hear it. And I certainly don't want to be the one to say it to them, but sometimes it's true and it has to be understood. Now, all of this is to say that we can use the word senescence in place of the word of aging if we're talking, say, about your entire body, right? In fact, as we age and we accumulate the impacts of inflammation and oxidative stress at the cellular level, this cell arrest program starts to fail. Cells live longer. They divide more times than they should. They pass on their faulty DNA, which then gets incorporated into organs and tissues. And now we see dysfunction as it relates to this state of senescence. And we do have studies that confirm that aging tissues contain higher amounts of senescent cells, cells that have escaped their preset replacement program. They hang around longer than they should, but they're less functional than healthy younger cells that are responding properly to signals that would allow them to grow, divide, and then be replaced. Recently, the journal Cell Biology published a paper, and they said, quote, "It is likely that the accumulation of senescent cells during aging reflects a gradual increase of different types of damage in different tissues." That's the end of the quote. Right? So the study of biological mechanisms of aging, or the biochemical mechanisms of aging and the pathophysiology of age-related disease, this is called geroscience. Geroscience. And the doctors in this field are called gerontologists. And we know one thing for sure, right? If let's make this personal. If you want to improve your health span, remember, that's the amount of time of your entire life that you're healthy and well. If you want to improve your health span, which necessarily involves reducing morbidity, if you want to improve your longevity and be well during that period, you must avoid or reverse or control the most common age-related diseases that contribute to cell aging and senescence. And so I'm going to give you a short list. I might make a comment here and there just to kind of give you top-level orientation, right? So if you want to age well and increase your health span, you have to prevent or control cardiovascular disease. And in this aspect, it's not as much about cholesterol and plaque deposits as it is about things like controlling blood pressure, as well as the functional capacity of your heart as a pumping mechanism. And one of the best predictors of your longevity is something called your VO2 max, which is how efficient your heart is at taking up oxygen and delivering it to your cells. And we'll break this down in subsequent episodes. We'll pick these apart and we'll talk in more specifics. This is just big picture overview introduction stuff today. So number one, if you want to increase your health span, you have to improve the functional capacity of your heart. Let's say it that way. Number two, you can't be a diabetic or a pre-diabetic or have insulin resistance. And obviously in the world of diabetes, there's type 1, there's type 2 diabetes. Just so that you know, for every one person with type 1 diabetes, which is autoimmune, statistically, there are 21 people with type 2 diabetes. So it's the bigger number. And, the good thing, or I guess the bad thing, is that type 2 diabetes is created by, but it's also reversed by things like diet and lifestyle changes. And one of the main problems with this entire spectrum of insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, or prediabetes and diabetes is that the high blood sugar and high insulin drive inflammation and oxidative stress, which then damages cells and DNA and creates faulty cell function and aging. It drives senescence. The other thing is, if you have autoimmunity, you need to know that and you need to control that as best as you can. And I'll state again for the record, nobody knows how to cure autoimmunity. That drug doesn't exist. The supplement doesn't exist. The diet and lifestyle change doesn't exist. The best that we can do, and in many cases it's, I'm tempted to say the word miraculous, how quality of life can change with some people who have autoimmunity. But basically the best we can do is control and contain immunological responses so that we don't get aggressive loss of function and decline over the years related to autoimmunity itself. Now, the most common autoimmunity is, of course, Hashimoto's hypothyroidism. So in a future episode, we'll talk a little bit more about that specifically. But two key points here as it relates to thyroid hormone balance and senescence is you have to have thyroid hormone balance for normal cell replacement, right? The normal biological process of senescence is in part controlled and driven by having adequate thyroid hormone levels. I'll just leave it there for now. The second point is that with autoimmunity, the inflammation and oxidative stress from the autoimmunity itself not only accelerates thyroid aging, the thyroid gland, but it ages the system-wide, right? It's not just your thyroid gland, it's your whole body. So let me back up, make sure that we're not losing for the forest for the trees, right? I'm just giving you a list of the top things that you have to think about if you're trying to improve longevity, but not just longevity, your health span. Number one, the efficiency of your cardiovascular system. Number two, blood sugar control. Number three, controlling autoimmune processes. Number four, respiratory diseases. And much of the research here focuses on things like COPD or emphysema, but just as important is your lungs as part of your barrier system and whether or not you have a history of susceptibility to upper respiratory infections. So think about the person who has chronic and recurrent bronchitis, or they have a history of pneumonia, or they've got a chronic cough, or they're the person who gets an upper respiratory infection first and they're the last one to get over it, right? It just lasts a long time, or they get these recurrent infections. That can be a problem as well. And then the final two things would be gastrointestinal disorders. So think things like leaky gut. Think about your microbiome, or irritable bowel syndrome, celiac disease, ulcerative colitis, and Crohn's. And then the last item on this big picture list is hormone balance or endocrine disease. Particularly the time period of peri and postmenopause with women, although men with andropausal symptoms, they count too. These are the big picture variables that contribute to morbidity, mortality, or at the very least can take away from longevity and take away from health span. But here's the reality check, and I'll close the episode with this thought. Avoiding, reversing, or controlling these states of dysfunction and disease that we just went through is only half of the longevity and health span equation. Because obviously even healthy people age, right? We're all going to age, period. Even healthy people see a deterioration of their physiology over time. It is a natural part of the health and aging process, which means eventually healthy people develop some degree of age-related morbidity. And it's just that the oldest healthy people have far less senescence than everyone else. It's not that they have none, they just have far less. But independent of these diseases or conditions that cause morbidity and increase mortality and reduce your health span. Remember, the health span is that portion of your lifespan where you are well. Independent of these things are the changes that happen over time at the cellular and subcellular level. Now, currently, one of the most popular theories of aging is the free radical theory, which postulates that we accumulate damage to our cells and DNA over time from inflammation and free radicals, and that this changes our DNA, which then, as we said just a moment ago, perpetuates dysfunction in future generations of cells and allows the accumulation of faulty cells because they're not being cleaned out and cleared out efficiently and on time. So in the next episode, as we build a framework for you to understand longevity and health span better, I'm going to share with you the 9 hallmarks of aging. I'm just going to read them out as a list, and then we'll break them down and we'll make some comments about each of these in the next episode. So the 9 hallmarks of aging, as published in the medical literature right now: number 1, genomic instability. Number 2, telomere shortening. You're going to hear a lot about telomeres just all over the internet over the next several years. Number 3, epigenetic alterations of DNA. Number 4, dysregulated nutrient sensing. Number 5, loss of proteostasis. Number 6, mitochondrial dysfunction. Number 7, stem cell exhaustion. Number 8, altered intercellular communication. And I think I may have miscounted there, but you'll get the picture. So we're going to go through all of that and more on the next episode of Inflammation Nation. This is a new mini-series on longevity, and I'm trying to help you shift your focus. No, I shouldn't say shift your focus. Add to your focus, not just control and resolution of your current symptoms, but a proactive stance and mindset that says, once I get these things under control, how will this contribute to, and what else can I do to improve my health span, my lifespan during which I am healthy, well, functional, and have a good quality of life. All right, guys, if you like this content, please make sure to subscribe and share this podcast with everyone you know. We'll see you next time on the Inflammation Nation.